Hi, I'm Emile Heskey.
I'm John Barnes, and this is a special podcast to celebrate 25 years of Show Racism the Red Card. I was playing for Liverpool. 25 years ago I was at Liverpool, coming to the end of my Liverpool career before I went on to Newcastle. Of course, I remember playing against Emile many times when he was at Leicester. Of course, he came to Liverpool after I'd gone. But we saw a lot of changes. 25 years ago when Show Racism the Red Card started was a little bit different to 10 years earlier, in the late 70s, when they talk about overt racism and what we had to put up with and what went on and what was the narrative and what was the response and what people thought the solutions were. Things have come a long way and changed since then. Nothing much has changed in terms of the reality of where, I won't say black footballers, because black footballers are now playing all over the world and they're playing in every position and there's no stigma or narrative about their worth. But in terms of when you finish playing football as a black ex-player, nothing much has changed.
I was 17, just turned 17. I made my debut for Leicester against QPR. So, yeah, I think pretty much the same as what John was saying there. We've obviously changed in the sense of having more representation on the playing field, which is great. It's great to see that you can show your worth. But again, when it comes to the next step within football, we can't really climb that ladder, and we don't really see the ins in that realm. But like John's saying, I think the racism, I was lucky enough that I was in that era where it was slowly starting to change, in the sense where John was playing in an era where it was normal to be racially abused on a football pitch. It was normal to have certain things thrown at you. Whereas when I started, it wasn't the norm to have things thrown at you. It wasn't the norm to be on a football pitch and be racially abused. Yes, it might happen, but it wasn't the norm. John, were you ever asked? Were you ever asked by teammates? Were you ever asked by senior figures how you felt, or be a part of a procedure that tries to eradicate or even just tries to understand what was going on?
Well, if you're talking about probably 1981, 82 when I first started, you look at Viv Anderson, Luther Blitz, and Ricky Hill who were playing before me, people weren't interested in it. The narrative at that particular time was, you get on with it. Yes, it's hard. These people are stupid. But if you can't put up with that, then you're not going to be a footballer. It wasn't, let us try and help you if you needed help. I didn't need any help. I'm strong enough to not let people worry me at all. So ignorant people couldn't affect me. But I know so many of my counterparts who were affected by it. And in fact, who are lost to the game of football because they wouldn't put up with it. If that happened and you fought against it, even in training, because sometimes your own teammates would say that, because this is the unconscious bias that they all have in times of stress. Somebody will say something to you, and if you reacted, you would be the one who wouldn't make it, not them. The manager would never say to them, don't say that. He would say to you, you got to put up with it. So it wasn't even an issue to talk about. But this was exactly the same in life. Football was exactly the same in life. And why should football be different?
Yeah.
A black man who can get a job walking down the street is going to be racially abused. Did anyone in society say, do you need any help? So why should we ask footballers if they need help? Why should we separate football from society, which is exactly what we're trying to do now? So back then, that wasn't the narrative at all in terms of looking for help. And I have a bit of an issue with what's going on now, because we're talking about helping actors, helping people in television, helping footballers, but who's helping the average person in the street? Who's talking about helping them when they go through what they go through? And that's what I'm concerned with doing. Not necessarily trying to stop racism in Bulgaria, trying to stop racism in the inner cities here in London. But to answer your question, no, that was not a directive at all. And if you needed that help, you would not have made it as a footballer.
Yeah. And it's funny because I spoke to Viv about it, and he was telling me that when he made his debut, he was told to go and warm up. And he stood in the corner, and then after 5 minutes, he come back and Cloughy says, well, what are you doing back here? He goes, oh, I've warmed up. He goes, well, go and warm up again. He goes, well, but they keep throwing stuff at me. And he says, well, if you can't deal with them throwing stuff in there, what are you going to deal with when they're on the pitch? Go and get out there and go and warm up.
That was the way it was back then. That was the way it was back then. And of course, in '95, I mean, you would have seen a bit of it. Obviously, not to the degree that maybe I have, and I didn't see to the degree that Viv had. However, if you look at what's actually going on now, and you're looking at the directives to try and get more inclusion and more representation from a legal perspective and trying to put things in place, that's all well and good. But more importantly, we have to change the perception of the average black person, not just trying to put a black person in charge to then feel we're going to change anything by doing that or giving them positions. So women go through something similar in terms of the perception that society has of a woman's ability to lead, to be in a Fortune 500 company, a gay's ability to go and fight in a war, and a black man's ability to think. So while from a footballing playing perspective, we are now completely accepted, because Emile won't remember because he's not old enough, but even from a playing perspective, you had to play in a particular position to make it as a black footballer. Because I don't know if you remember the Ron Knowles documentary when he talked about black players can't think too much. You can't put them in positions of responsibility. Goalkeeper, defensive midfield player. You're quick, you're strong, you're skillful, but you don't think too much. Put them on the wing, put them up front. So in the 70s, you had so many black players who played up front. That's why Viv and Brendan Batson were unique in that the perception of their abilities as defenders in positions of responsibility was not what black players did. So we also had those hurdles to overcome. Whereas now, I'm sure Emile's played for England. We'd have had 8 black players on the pitch, in all positions with David James and, Sol Campbell or whoever else. So I don't know how you felt, Emile, about when you got into the side as to, because you didn't experience what we experienced. You could only go through your own experiences. Yeah. But how did you find it when you got into the England squad, for example, when you saw a lot of black players and the dynamic of either going abroad or playing at home?
Well, the thing is, when I obviously I came to Leicester, and I think I was one of a few players in Leicester who were playing, black players that were playing, and then going to the national team was just so different, especially when you're coming through the youth ranks. So many black players. We had 4, 5, 6, 7 black players. I had Rio, myself, players like that coming through, and then you you get to a point and you think, well, is there any more? Are you going to get the opportunities? And yeah, look, it's I don't know what to say on it, to be honest with you, because again, we're losing generations of coaches, we're losing generation of admin, we're losing generation of the next generation of doing stuff like yourself, John. When you went on to be a coach, and I'm looking at you and thinking, yeah, this is great, I could be a coach. Then you lose a job, and then I'm thinking, okay, well, where's your next one? Then you don't see another one for a certain amount of time, and then you cling on to them because it's inevitably I cling on to what I
see.
Yeah, what I see and what looks like me. So for me, growing up watching football, I see John Barnes running down the wing. I'm pretending to be left-footed. I'm right-footed. It worked because it helped me to practice with my left foot, but I'm pretending to be John Barnes, and that's why I want to be playing a footballer. When I was growing up, I was athletics. Linford Christie. Wanted to be Linford Christie, so I put, you're just running up and down the street, going mad. And then now, obviously, going into football now, and it's funny now, I'm on the other side of football, and I'm working with a coach who used to pretend to be me in the playground. And now see the other side of it. But what's the next step with the coaching side of it? So who can we aspire to be within the coaching side of it? Who can we aspire to be within the admin, within all the other side of football? And that is the tougher one for me.
I mean, when I first played, even when I went to Liverpool in 1987 or Watford before, I mean, even your own teammates, because this is the way they've been brought up as human beings, not as footballers, because you would hear that people saying that in the street. It's not as if football was different to anywhere else. Now, times have changed in terms of the overt racism. So you don't hear players saying that to each other anymore because things have changed. But as Emile says, the reality of when you finish playing, how many black coaches, how many black administrators. So from a playing perspective, that is why, while I do have a little bit of sympathy for the modern players now, in many respects, it's like, please, what are you complaining about? I understand that you're really trying to make a point and you're trying to change it and trying to change things. But in terms of overemphasizing how terrible it is in your industry, when it is, I'm talking about the game itself, when you're earning the same amount of money, you aren't getting racially abused by your teammates. The fact that you can maximize your potential. When you're not playing anymore, that is what we have to, and of course, yes, managers, coaches, administrators. But my thing is that until we change the perception of the average man in the street, nothing will change above. So things have changed a lot since then, but that doesn't mean they don't think it. White privilege is not about a white person being given an opportunity because he's white, necessarily. That's not, because everybody has to work hard. You have to have the talent. You have to have like when the whole idea about Frank Lampard being a manager, and when they talk about Frank Lampard or Steve Gerrard being a manager, Frank took it personally, and it's not personal. It's not personal. Frank, when you talk about white privilege that white people go, it's about the group you belong to. Meaning that you can have working class, poor, underprivileged white people, but they're not working class, poor, underprivileged because they're white. That is also, they lack privilege based on their class, based on their environment, but not based on their color. So white privilege, and Lawrence Fox, the actor, was upset when someone said he was white and privileged, and he said, I could help being white. We understand that. White privilege is when you're walking down the street, does a woman grip her purse and cross the road when she sees you? No. When you go into a shop, newsagent, to buy something, does the shop assistant look at you because he thinks you're going to steal something and follow you around? No. Now, you will say, that's not white privilege. What you will say is that that's just normal. But what's normal to you is privilege to a lot of black people, because that's what happens to black people. Now, John Barnes, Emile Heskey, we go through celebrity privilege. Yeah. So, John Barnes and Emile Heskey, people know who we are. They're not going to follow us in a shop or cross the road because they know who we are, so we're privileged. But for the average black person, that is what they go through. So white privilege is personal to a white person, is to the group that you belong to, who are given advantages based on the color of your skin. And it's more to do with the fact that people give you the benefit of the doubt that you're not going to steal something and you're not going to rob them. So when you talk about what do we say, that is why discrimination is very nuanced, not just racial, not just from a sexist point of view, not just from a religious point of view, also from a class point of view. So the point you made about class, you know, working class people who don't have much, they are also discriminated against, but that's a completely separate issue. That doesn't mean that they don't have white privilege, it just means that they're less privileged in other ways.
He talks about we have celebrity privilege, but I was in France, and they obviously didn't know who I was, and that same thing, I sat down, I went through I was in the airport, sat down it was a pret-a-manger, I think it was, had my tea, sat down on the chair, woman behind her grabbed her bag off the chair behind me and pulled it to her, and then they all got up and walked across the other side of the actual coffee shop. So it happens, and to be fair, it's something that we're used to, and even when walking in a lift, I've got to make sure people are okay with me being in the lift. And you've got to have that about you, because you want everyone else to feel uncomfortable. You want everyone else to feel comfortable with having you around, and this is the thing that we have to live every day. Now, when you talk about class, I think it's the same thing. And I was listening to one comedian talking about it, and a lot of our problems and a lot of our struggles are the same as the white working class and the lower class. It's the same thing that we're going through. Absolutely. But the fact that a lot of the white working class, they still see themselves as white, so they can't see the connection. But actually, we have the same connections. We're fighting against the same people who we feel are keeping us down. But we have the same problems.
Yeah. But unfortunately, what has happened is that society for thousands of years have always been run by the upper and the middle classes, has convinced the white working classes that all of their problems are because of immigrants.
Yeah.
So they blamed immigrants, then saying the problem that you are, and if the white working classes were to really analyze the situation, they would understand that before immigrants, and if you talk about immigration in the 1950s, whatever it was, the white working class were always downtrodden and disenfranchised and discriminated against before they were immigrants. And of course, now that immigrants are here, they're going to blame immigrants. Now, after immigration, after immigrants, it'll be something else. And that is why the class dynamic also plays a big part. Now, as Emile says, it's interesting because even black, how insidious and all-encompassing this idea of if you're black, you understand what discrimination is, even if every now and again, Emile and I will experience celebrity privilege. And it's not all the time, because as Emile says, when they don't know I'm John Barnes, they'll stop me, the police. They don't know I'm John Barnes, they won't. So I understand that. But even from Obama, the most empowered black man or any multimillionaire, they know what racism is, because when they go through their celebrity privilege and at the time when all of a sudden people don't know who they are, we automatically feel it's because we're black. Now, it may not be. You know, when I get stopped at the airport, for example, and I get stopped, if they don't recognize me, I feel, oh, it's because I'm black. Why should I feel that way? Because white people get stopped, and I'm sure they don't think it's because they're white. And being John Barnes, 99% of the time people know who I am. Why can't it be that he stopped me just for no reason that, you know, he's just stopping me, not because I'm black? It goes to show how insidious this whole idea of black negativity is, that even black people who experience celebrity privilege feel that. That really is a telltale sign. So if we feel it, and we're fairly privileged, Emile and I, what does the average black person feel every day of his life? And what empathy do we have for him? When even John Barnes, who gets it maybe 5% of his life, not even that, when I go to Bulgaria, that's why I say to the football players, whatever you're experiencing when you go to Montenegro or Serbia, yeah? But then for the other 5 days of the week and probably 6 months of the year when you're in England and you don't get it, and you feel how it makes you feel as a person that you're on television saying how terrible it is, what do you think your people, where you come from, in the inner cities you come from, in Leicester or Brixton or Toxteth, feel every day of their life? And why don't we talk about them to try and help them more than talking about how terrible it is in Bulgaria or Montenegro?
What are we doing in the inner cities? What are we doing with our communities? Are we really pushing towards change? Would I take my kids to football? Yeah, I would. But I've got a different perspective on football, and I've got a different view on football than your inner city kid. Can he afford? One thing, can they afford to go to football? And then another thing is, do they feel safe enough to go for football within that realm? I wrote about it in my book that I got chased from a football match. I went to a Leicester City football match. I got chased. Probably I was about 13, 14. I got chased going back had to run back into town. Now, would I say it's different now? I don't think you'll get that open racism like that. I don't think you'll get that, if I'm honest with you. I do believe my kids are probably in a safer place than where when I was growing up, and obviously when John was playing.
Emile, you know those people who chased you?
Yeah.
When you scored a hat-trick for Leicester, what do you think those very same people do? Will they chase you and want to beat you up because you're black? Or they want to jump on you and buy you a drink?
Well, this is exactly the thing that I wrote about. I said it was baffling for me, because that same person would have, fast forward 3 years or 4 years, that same person would have been screaming my name from the stands. And that was just baffling for me, even just to think back now, that I can't walk down the street and be looking at a 13-year-old or 14-year-old and thinking, look at their colour, or look at this, and me want to attack them or even say a word to them. They're not even really there to me, to be honest with you. But
the point Emile made.
Huh?
The point Emile made is a good point about the raising awareness. That's all we can do. That's all football does. Mm-hmm. We think football changes society. Football can't change society, because Raheem Sterling is a hero. Raheem Sterling is a hero. Raheem Sterling is trying to change perceptions. Do you think one Liverpool fan is going to listen to Raheem Sterling because they hate him because he moved to Man City? Or a Man United fan? Or an Arsenal fan? No. He may affect, and is he going to affect a Manchester City's fan because he says no to racism? If he doesn't score goals and he's rubbish? No. Football can't change a thing. What it can do is raise the awareness and have the profile, which is what it does. Emile has played in Champions League matches. Emile, I'm sure, used to do it for 20 years. Say no to racism, pass it along the line. Yeah. You're playing against Russia. What impact does that have? None whatsoever. It raises the profile, but we have to then do something else apart from that. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you why I think it can do nothing. All it can do is raise the profile, and I'll tell you why it can't do nothing. Look at America, where the New York Knicks and the basketball team said, and they boycott matches because of George Floyd. Yeah? Now, let's think about realistically. A racist, consciously or unconsciously, as most people are unconsciously racially biased anyway, so even say unconsciously or consciously anything, but an unconsciously or consciously racist policeman sees a black man and he's going to stop him. Now, as he's pulling him up to stop him, do you think that policeman thinks, if I stop this man, the New York Knicks are not going to play the LA Lakers tomorrow night, so I'm not going to stop him? No, he won't. No. It's making no difference whatsoever in the heat of the moment when people have to make a decision as to whether they're going to shoot somebody, as to whether they give somebody a job. That has nothing to do with it. Mm-hmm. Raheem Sterling saying, say no to racism isn't going to stop a chief executive when he interviews a black man for the job as manager to say, well, Raheem Sterling said, say no to racism, so I'm going to do that. We have to change the perception. And that's not changing perceptions. What it does is it highlights the problem. Now, after highlighting the problem, we have to have programs in schools and debates talking about changing the perception of the average black person. Not individualizing a great black man and saying, I'm not racist because I voted for Obama and I love Beyonce and my next door neighbor's black and my best friend's black, so therefore I'm not racially biased. History is so important for us to understand how we, first of all, came up with this idea of racial hierarchy. Scientific racism, geneticists, anthropologists, from Blumenbach to Linnaeus, to all of these brightest minds in the world told people 200 years ago that black people are inferior. That's how it started. And then to justify and legitimize it, colonialism and slavery meant that you had to prove that there's a certain group of people who are less than you intellectually and morally. So we have to civilize them, we're helping them out. Fine. That's a long time ago. People say that doesn't exist now. It does. Because this is what Winston Churchill thought. This is what everybody thought from the last 20 years. Now we're trying to change things. But this has been in our society for a while for us to feel black people, women, gays are inferior. So first of all, we have to dismantle what we've learned. But more importantly, we have to accept that that's what we think. But we don't. Because we say, oh, we all know that's wrong. We don't think it. The only people who think it are Liam Neeson, Peter Beardsley, John Terry, who gets caught, and the rest of the thing, and those two racist fans. But everyone else thinks it's fine. But we don't. We don't. I mentioned the unconscious bias, racial bias that everybody has. The average person has. Because if you ask the average white person, where would he rather live, next to a black man or a white man, going to a bar with black people or white people, we know what this answer would be as much as we won't admit it. And because we don't admit it, when we don't admit it, we can't come to a solution. Because by not admitting it, what we do is we wait for Peter Beardsley to get caught or Liam Neeson or two racist fans, point the finger at them and we go, that's the problem. The problem is them. The problem is football. The problem is the police. Now what about television? What about every industry which is underrepresented? Everyone absolves themselves of responsibility because we focus on George Floyd and football. So until we're going to admit it within ourselves that we discriminate, and we do, if Liverpool's going to get a manager, would I want a Muslim manager or a white manager who I've never heard of? I'm not talking about a famous one. If there's a white manager I've never heard of or a Muslim manager I've never heard of, who do you think I would have? Any of us here would have more faith in initially before we know his ability and we can see who's more qualified. But our initial thought is he must be better. And this is what we have to change. Our unconscious bias that we've all been taught subliminally for hundreds of years, which is in us, but we won't admit it. So we have to admit that there's a problem, but people don't see it as a problem.
Look, I think if we get education right, I think once you get education right, I think you're setting a foundation. If you carry on the way that we're doing it, I don't think there's going to be any change, because we still got the perception of black people within the education. Well, there's no representation with black people within the education anyway. But why are we not being taught about Tony Collins? Why are we not being taught? Why these little things have been missed out in history? Yet we know about everyone else. But again, I think once we start setting that foundation for the younger kids to understand the importance, and I think JB was talking about Michael Holding, and he's talking about the light bulb. Who was to know? Who was to know about all that? You know, Henry Ford. Who's to know about that a black person was a key component in that as well. So until we start setting them foundations, I think we'll still be on the same pattern.
Putting a brilliant black person, putting a brilliant Asian person, Priti Patel, Rishi Sunak, putting them in power is not changing anything at all. We are now changing our perceptions of Obama and Beyonce and Priti Patel. Are we going to change our perception of the average Hindu in the street? That is what we have to change. And why it's very dangerous is because all of a sudden now, since George Floyd, you go on television, how many black people do you now see on television? On Sky Sports, on talk shows, on music shows. How many black people do you see? Has anything changed for 99% of people in the inner cities? No. So what will happen because of this, which has happened for 1,000 years from the Magna Carta, is that an elite group of people, be they black, be they women, be they gay, an elite group, because of this now directive, will be given positions, but nothing will change for the majority of people. And what will be the consequence of that is that society will then say, well, what more do you want? You've got a black president. John Barnes is now managing England. We've got a black man on television. What more do you want? Because we just keep asking. So I say, forget about our black president, forget about John Barnes being a manager. Let us give our 99% of black people in the inner cities, give them an equal opportunity. Because then more people will then be able to climb up the ladder. And that's why I say it's dangerous, because we're going to convince ourselves, because now Idris Elba's going to get an Oscar, and we've got more black people on Good Morning Britain, that things are now changing. That is why you look at what Marcus Rashford did. What Marcus Rashford did is not a black thing. It's an underprivileged thing for inner city kids who are underprivileged. So you can equate that to black if you like. What he could have done was given £250,000 and say, go and feed yourselves. Would have been great. Well done. But he changed government policy with his platform and his profile to then change it for a long period of time for the most kids. So when Raheem Sterling gives 250 cup final tickets or semi-final tickets to the kids in Stonebridge Park, bad knife crime area, that's not going to help them. It'll make them feel good for the day when they go to Wembley. He should take them into a press conference, as he can, and say these kids aren't being given an education, access to social care or housing, that's going to help them for the future. So the more we just look to get elite black people into these positions, and it's okay, and Emile is right, you have to see what you want to be. So you have to have those figures to look at. But how can Emile go into the inner cities, and Emile is from those inner cities, and Emile can say, or Ian Wright, look, you know, I'm an example, look what I did, blah, blah, blah. 90% of them will say, yeah, but you didn't get kicked out of school when you were 14. You never got stabbed. You weren't even couldn't even get GCSEs. So it's okay for us who've made it, despite whoever made it, despite their environment. It's okay for us to say, yeah, I did it, you can do it. Why don't we try and create an atmosphere and an environment down below from an educational point of view, housing point of view in the inner cities to help themselves. And until we start to do that, we will always get the odd black man, very much like, I'll end on this, the Rooney Rule. Wasn't that going to be a great day? The Rooney Rule. 3 black coaches started before the Rooney Rule. They actually employed at least 15, but they all got sacked and never got a job again because we didn't change the perception. Laws can't change anything, and now they've still got 3. It's not a token face because they are worthy of their awards. Idris Elba is worthy of an Oscar. But the more we focus on trying to do that, the more we're not looking at changing the perception of not the Idris Elba, because he's brilliant, or the Obama, change the perception of the average black man with big lips, who is just an average person in the inner city. That is what we have to change, because then you will have many more of them maximizing their potential to do what they want to do, rather than saying there's not a problem because how many black people got Oscars and how many black managers do we have? That's not changing anything. That's just changing, and that has happened throughout history. Throughout history, from the Magna Carta to so many people, the middle class is so many people getting more power, but nothing changes for 99% of the masses. And that is what I'm interested in changing. Not what's happening at the top, what's happening at the bottom.